Thank you. Um, I've already been introduced, so I just wanted to say thank you for coming, and I want to acknowledge the context for this session. The West Yorkshire and
Hi, Jamie.
Harrogate
Did you get what you needed?
BAME review report is being launched this morning amid a global pandemic. And just to recall that we're also in the middle of Black History Month. In this International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife, which has just shown how consistently nurses and other health and care and voluntary sector people have risen to the challenge of delivering complex care to diverse communities. This pandemic has shown us that racism and structural inequality aren't simply intellectual concepts, quite the opposite. COVID-19 has shown us that racism and inequality is real. It impacts on our bodies as much as our minds. It shortens lives and it is squeezing our breath. The health inequalities faced by Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities also tells us a great deal about what we value as a society. It tells us where organisations place their attention and fundamentally what we're all prepared to tolerate as communities who live with the impact of structured disadvantages and inequalities. In many respects, it'd be all too easy to continue to do what large-scale systems perhaps have always done, to carry on with the day-to-day work and deliver business as usual and conveniently forget these tough and uncomfortable truths. And that's why I'm incredibly proud to have chaired this review, because we collectively have dared to ask and start to answer some of these tough questions. We've sought to deliver collectively, be curious in order to seek out the experiences and voices that have been seldom heard and are too easily ignored. And we've tried to create an active and vibrant partnership that at every layer is committed to changing outcomes for patients, staff, and the communities within this footprint. This review faces the future with a plan and a solid partnership that is determined to be the change that we want to see. It is a testament to everyone who has contributed to it, but most of all, it's delivered in the service of the communities of West Yorkshire and Harrogate who deserve to live their lives by organisations who have a profound understanding of the contribution that they actually make to delivering social justice. For the staff across every sector that contributed, this review speaks to your vision and insight about creating truly inclusive organisations. It shines a light on your generosity and continued commitment to excellence and to sharing your learning that will play a large part in its success. For communities, your intelligence and your breadth of understanding have been remarkable. For the leaders at every level of organisations involved in this review, your willingness to work through complexity, plurality, coupled with the energy for change is absolutely necessary for this process. And I want to thank all of you that we were able to deliver this review. I really am impressed about the connections that have been forged. They've been necessary and we've had important conversations. But more important than that, we have made promises to our people and our community. We know it's going to be hard and we know that things aren't always going to go to plan, even when we've disagreed about things. But I do believe that we're richer and wiser and better equipped than ever before to deliver the change that we so desperately need. And coming together is actually the start. Staying together and achieving what we set out to do must be where we focus our energy from now on. So colleagues, I am absolutely delighted to commend this review to you and to urge others who want to change to get in touch, get involved, adapt their processes to deliver change in your area. This isn't just a singular moment, but a movement for equity. So please join us. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dame Donna. If we could now move to Councillor Swift, please. Over to you, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Dame Donna, for those opening comments. This is a very big week for the West Yorkshire Harrogate Partnership, I think, with the launch of this review today, following also from the first climate change summit the partnership held on Monday and Tuesday. I think we need to be proud that despite the immediate pressures of the pandemic, we're investing in tackling two of the biggest long-term challenges that are facing us as partners working on health and care. The roots of the decision to set up this commission this review set back to the emerging evidence in May about the disproportionate and devastating impact that COVID-19 was having on our Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities across West Yorkshire as much as nationally. The partnership had already set out big ambitions to tackle health inequalities, but COVID-19 shone a harsh light on their impact, exacerbating and exploiting existing health inequalities across our communities and workplaces. And that's why, following an initial discussion at a meeting of the Partnership Board in June, and taking notice from the early work coming out of Public Health England, we asked for this review to be commissioned and to be independently chaired, with a clear message that we wanted it to focus not just on what we already know about the inequalities exist, but rather that it should be about challenging all of us on what we need to prioritise to achieve a change in pace in delivering on the ambitions we have to address them. I'm very pleased that Dame Donna agreed to chair the commission, and I'd like to thank her again for taking on this role and for the energy and passion that she has put into it. And I think, as she said in her introduction, what's come out of this is not simply a report with a set of recommendations, but also a very clear movement that is engaging people to be part of the change that we want to see. And I think that's shown the strength and value of using an independently chaired commission for this kind of work. Firstly, by having an independent chair who brings in a broader perspective and a different range of knowledge and experience, I think it adds credibility and authority to the work and the recommendations that come. And that strengthens the case and the pressure on the partnership, which is all of us, all our organisations together, to then listen and to act on the finding. Secondly, by introducing a slightly arm's length element of the work through a commission, it gives more confidence to everyone, to our staff and our partners, that we really wanted them in this process to tell it like it is, that there was no pressure, explicit or implicit, to say what the organisational line was, but we really want to hear and have heard about what the real experiences of how we provide health are on the ground. And thirdly, I hope it's sending out a message to the wider community that we want to be completely transparent and open in the way these issues are raised and addressed. I hope we started to show that transparency through the way the Commission worked, with open meetings and all the papers shared, for example, and that we'll reflect that going ahead. Sadly, as the COVID-19 pandemic continues, we've seen no easing of the disproportionate impact it's had on our Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. So today's launch of this report is both timely and critical. I'd like to thank everyone who's worked on it, who's contributed, who's listening to today's launch, and most importantly, who now feels a part of this work and wants to be part of taking it forward. And I want to pledge that once we've heard the findings, that our next step as a partnership board will be to make sure we agree strong actions that flow from it, and that we then work to hold all of us collectively mutually accountable for making sure they are delivered, and that we keep the implicit promises that have been made to our community throughout this process. So thank you all who've contributed, and thank you everybody who's taking part this morning, and look forward to hearing more about the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tim Swift. Councillor Tim Swift is the chair of our partnership board. Can I now introduce you please to Rob Webster, who's the lead for West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership. Rob is also the CEO for South West Yorkshire NHS Partnership Foundation Trust. Over to you please, Rob.
Thanks, Karen, and hello everybody. I seem to have the longest title in Europe, but that's just a a reflection on, in fact, I've got two roles, and I think leading this partnership and running an NHS Foundation Trust is a privilege, but it also brings responsibility. And what we've got today really is a reflection of the fact that all of us across West Yorkshire and Harrogate Partnership feel responsible and feel accountable for the communities and the people that we serve. And I'm delighted that we're publishing this review today and that we're committing to firm actions as a result. Too often in this debate, we sit back and admire the problem, seeking ever more data and evidence about the fact that there is a problem, instead of dealing with what's squarely in front of us, that people face inequality and poorer outcomes because of where they live, and often because of the colour of their skin and their background. So I'm really pleased that we're doing this. I'm absolutely delighted that Professor Dame Donna Kinnaird agreed to chair the independent review. As Councillor Swift said, it's really important to get a fresh pair of eyes to come and look at what you're doing. And I think that's a reflection of the kind of partnership that we are. Just to remind you, this is a true partnership of the NHS and local authorities, the third sector, providers, commissioners and communities. We've existed for the last 4.5 years, and we exist to improve outcomes for local people. In doing that, we have to address health inequalities, we have to manage variations in care, and we have to use our resources wisely to make the biggest difference possible. As Councillor Swift described, we'd already set out to work on this agenda in ways which we thought would make a difference, by making sure that care was accessible, by making sure that we had a leadership which was reflective of our communities, by tackling health inequalities, and by focusing on some of the systemic issues that face communities around employment and the environment. Once we saw the impact being felt by communities, and once we heard how scared people were by coronavirus, then we felt that we needed to do more. It was very sobering to me to listen to some of my staff talk to me about how scared they were, to relay to me some of the noises and some of the chatter that there was in their communities about how they expected to be treated during the pandemic, and how that really wasn't a conversation that was surfacing sufficiently. So as a partnership with a plan, we thought it was really important to change the dynamic, bring people in to have a look at what we're doing and really ask, are we doing enough? What more should we be doing that we're missing? And can we come together around a firm action plan? So this morning, what we're going to do is to describe a bit of the evidence of what we've heard and what we know, a bit about what we now need to do, and some firm next steps to make sure that we're not sitting here again next year or the year after and thinking, let's talk about racial and structural inequities in our society. But what we're doing is making sure that the recommendations have started to make the difference that we want to see, and that we continue to feel responsible and accountable for that progress. So I'm going to hand over now to others to talk us through the recommendations in the review. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Fatima Khan Shah, and I'm proud to live and work in West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership. I'm a director focusing on unpaid carers and personalised care, and I just want to talk you through a little bit of some of the processes regarding the review and introduce some of the recommendations. If I could have the slides, please, that would be great. Thanks, Joe. So the process was, for me, particularly really important. As someone who's really passionate about the involvement of people, particularly carers, we wanted to make sure that we were reflective in the makeup of our review panel, but also heard from people that wouldn't normally be heard from in a review like this. And we were also keen, because the leaders were very, very emphatic about this, that we move at pace because the evidence is there. And what we're very, very keen to do is explore what we could do as a system to address some of the issues that Rob, Donna and Councillor Swift have already alluded to. So we took 5 review panel meetings, which took place during July and October, and were chaired by Professor Dame Donna Kinnair. We had a really great diverse mix on the review panel, ranging from elected members from our third sector, members from our local authorities, as well as our NHS partners, to really get as much of a spread of expertise and knowledge and skill set from across the system on how we address these themes. I think one of the key things that was a step change was the fact that we started this journey with no preconceived notions. So even the themes themselves were not pre-decided prior to starting the review. They were down to presenting some information of where we were, where we're starting as a partnership, and for the review panel to identify the areas of focus to further explore and identify recommendations from, and you can see those on that particular slide. One of the key things that we also identified really early on was the importance of representation, not only from the third sector, but recognising the impact and connections they have with their fingers on the pulse in the grassroots of the communities of West Yorkshire and Harrogate. And it was with that in mind that we very swiftly created a third sector panel with representatives from across the region, fantastically chaired by the fabulous Alison Lowe. And they were really, really crucial to the work of the review, supporting the work that we were doing, but also providing that constructive challenge and real insight to what it felt like across the region. What I'll also say is, as somebody from South Asian heritage, this was particularly important to me. You know, I lost a few people, close relatives and colleagues and friends as a result of COVID, and I felt a real privilege and responsibility to make sure that this review was not one of many, but actually one that delivered what we intended it to do and would really think outside the box and transform the way we deal with this agenda going forward. If I could have the next slide, please, Jo. So as we mentioned, there were 4 particular themes that we were addressing within the review, and the first one that came through overwhelmingly from our staff was the concern about how it feels like to work in this region right now during a pandemic. And what particularly was important was for us to shine a light on specific areas that didn't really get the same profile as some of our counterparts. For example, people working in social care settings, transport and food roles, factory environments, and even our carers who come from diverse backgrounds and are, you know, doing an amazing job supporting our fight against this pandemic, but weren't getting the recognition or support that they could do or was on parity of esteem with their counterparts. What was also really, really important, and what we heard from verbal testimony as well as evidence brought to the review panel, was the importance of channeling support to vulnerable colleagues, not just BAME colleagues, but people from all different backgrounds, to support job retention, but also to recognise that we are in a very challenging time when it comes to our economy, and making sure that we are thinking creatively and outside of the box when it comes to job retention and our self-employed staff as well across the region. One of the amazing things about working in West Yorkshire and Harrogate is that we're not starting from scratch. A lot of work had taken place prior to the review starting, one of which was the work of the West Yorkshire and Harrogate BAME network supporting the work of risk assessments across the system. What was really clear was that the risk assessment should only be part of a journey, a start of a journey, to explore what appropriate and mitigating actions we can do to keep all our employees and staff safe across the region. In addition to that, what was really, really clear was that we have a significant proportion of our people from BAME backgrounds working in high-risk professions. It's really important that we think creatively about how to support them in ways that are meaningful to them. And some of the things that we've been doing are things like support virtually, specifically recognising the cultural and faith needs of our different staff. And then the final area that we reviewed or explored was the importance of simplifying communication messages. It's very confusing at the moment for people from different backgrounds to understand what the key messages are, and also addressing some of the concern and emotional load that's been created from other events that have taken place during this time, such as the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd. So it's really important that we explored other ways by which we can communicate with these communities, alleviate their concerns, but also recognise that not everybody is digitally savvy and mitigate digital exclusion. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. The other area we explored, obviously, was supporting further our system ambition to make our leadership more reflective of our communities. And one of the key areas we discovered during this journey is it's not enough to think about the leadership at the top. We've got to think further down the pipeline to make sure that we are cultivating the staff to fulfill their potential and to really get them to think about leadership as early as possible. One of the key things that really resonated with me as somebody from a South Asian background is self-belief is so important. The ability to be able to connect and see people like me within the higher stratas, decision-making forums of our system is really important, and that culture of enabling people to fulfill their potential irrespective of their ethnic background was crucial. And again, we are not starting from scratch here in West Yorkshire and Harrogate. We're very fortunate to have a number of chief executive, chief operating officers, non-executive directors and directors from different backgrounds, but we also recognise there is more we can do. One of the key things that we've started to do as well is making sure that we have loads of different people from different backgrounds being very visible across the system via communications, such as our podcast, Can You Hear Me? But also some of the communication campaigns that we've had, particularly focal during Black History Month. And the other area is also about recognising, as Rob alluded to, the real concerns and fears that our staff and communities have about the disproportionate impact of COVID on our communities, but also the wider issue of how health inequalities are impacting us on our day-to-day lives. And as Donna's alluded to, just the impact of being someone from a different ethnic background can make you anxious, can make your adrenaline throb all the time, and that will have a physiological impact on your health and well-being and subsequent impact on your health. So we really need to consider that while recognising that not everybody from an ethnic background is socially deprived or experiences poverty, there are still several themes of areas where we can support people to feel comfortable within their organisations, to access services and really enable them to fulfil our potential. The other area that we explored was recognising that there are things taking place right now, but gaps within the leadership that we needed to address, such as recognising the fact that there are certain skills and experiences and exposure that our colleagues from ethnic minorities will really benefit exposure to. And it was with that in mind that we developed the West Yorkshire and Harrogate BAME Fellowship, which really focuses on supporting our system leaders to fulfil their potential, developing not only the skills, but also the exposure, experience and networks, which is crucial to support people to transition into the highest levels of our system. Next slide, please, Joe. If I could have the next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So the recommendations for these two particular themes, I think, are transformative and very, very thought-provoking. The first is, it's really important that we recognise as anchor institutions our influence reaches far beyond health and care organisations, and we're really keen to utilise that influence with working with our colleagues such as the local authority, but other partners too, to deliver co-designed and ethically appropriate advice and support for people who are in high-risk roles. We also want to work with our partners to ensure that equality of opportunity is considered specifically for BAME groups in all economic development and recovery plans, including things such as apprenticeships. We also recognise the real importance that partner organisations should engage with their BAME networks, and many have now started to develop their own individual BAME networks, as well as linking into those across the region to seek assurance regarding the impact and effectiveness of risk assessments. The BAME networks are there to provide that constructive challenge, but also that support with their lived experience and expertise to ensure that we get this right, and that when we are having conversations about safety within the workplace, both our frontline managers as well as our BAME colleagues feel supported within those conversations. It's really important that we recognise the impacts of racism within our society. We know it exists. We know that it impacts people, as Don has alluded to, not only emotionally but physically too. And it's very important that we recognise that not one size fits all, as we talk about quite frequently on many forums. Not all BAME is the same, and it's important that we have communications that are bespoke to the different needs of different communities. In regards to specifically supporting our ambition to make sure our leadership is reflective of our communities, it's important that our partnership develops and embeds inclusive leadership standards where our leaders personally pledge their own commitment to this agenda, starting with recruitment and selection procedures and ensuring that we are as inclusive as we can be within those processes. It's also important that where this doesn't happen, that we have independent discrimination panels with BAME representation to review all cases of racial discrimination, and also to make sure that we are, where we can, cultivating the talent to make the best of the potential that we've got here. And we've got lots of talent in West Yorkshire and Harrogate The BAME mentorship is the next stage in the evolution of the BAME fellowship programme, and really developing not only the talent within the system, but utilising the existing talent within our leadership, because we've got lots in West Yorkshire and Harrogate. And then the final one, before I pass over to my colleague Sarah Smith, is recognising that all organisations should engage in positive action to seek out the talent. So we've talked about how we're doing it existingly with our staff within the system, but what about engaging with our schools, going out to our communities where there are disproportionate groups from different ethnic backgrounds, and encouraging them to come and work in our health and care system and beyond, because we want everyone to contribute and enable this to be the best place to work. I'm now going to pass you over to my fabulous colleague Sarah Smith, who's going to talk you through the remaining 2 themes and recommendations. Thank you.
Morning everyone. My name's Sarah Smith. I'm a consultant in public health here at West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership, and I lead the Improving Population Health programme, so essentially around kind of how we can improve the health of the 2.7 million people who live in West Yorkshire and Harrogate, who are represented in the nice infographic behind me. I'm going to cover across 2 of the other recommendation themes. So one of those themes is population planning. So essentially how we ensure that we're planning services and delivering services in a way that meet the needs of our population. We heard quite strongly throughout the review that one of the things we need to understand the population and to really underpin what we're doing is we need ethnicity to be recorded in the right way across all settings, and we also need that data to be put in the hands of decision makers and coupled with insight and stories as well, so we can really make sure the services we're planning and designing meet the needs of our population. So that really makes up the first recommendation that we're talking about in relation to population planning. We had a great example from a volunteering community sector called the Feel Good Factor in Leeds, who are working with their primary care network and really coupling the data that they're getting and kind of sense checking it with local populations. So they're the kind of things we'd really like to build on in terms of the population planning element for the first recommendation, in addition to making sure we're actually recording ethnicity in the first place. The second recommendation was around making sure we've got community representation throughout the whole planning process. So when we're thinking about understanding needs in the first place and people around the table, when we're designing and procuring services, we've got that real representation that's reflective of our local populations. And the same when we're kind of delivering care and evaluating care, that representation is there too, right through to when we're looking at how we improve services. So that makes up our second recommendation. Our third recommendation, we heard a lot throughout the review process, both from local communities and from the voluntary community sector themselves, around how people were being supported during the pandemic through these organisations and the really important role that they were playing. So we made a recommendation to do more to support the voluntary and community sector in delivering these services and making sure commissioning arrangements could really allow them to be on a level playing field with other providers in the design and the delivery of care. So that makes up our third recommendation for population planning. We then had a recommendation around service access, so how people are actually entering services and accessing services, and are they really representative of the local population in the way that they need to be. So we've made a recommendation to monitor that and to really understand that, and part of that will be working with our organisations across health and care services to help them understand inequalities and help them to address them as well. And also to really understand who's not accessing our services that could be, and making sure we're not missing people. So, for example, population groups that aren't represented or registered with general practice, how are we supporting those groups, and who are we really missing? So that makes up our fourth recommendation. And our fifth recommendation, again, will be really reliant on engagement. And it's about making sure the services, we call it a culturally competent, again, meet the kind of cultural, religious and social needs of all the populations we serve. So that might be making sure we've got a representative workforce. So when people enter services, they can relate to the people they're seeing. and also making sure services are accessible in terms of digital pathways, and in terms of the information we share with people to make sure they're acceptable to the population that we serve. And that will mean that we get the right people through the services and make sure they kind of engage in the right way as well. So they're the kind of 5 recommendations around population planning. If we could have the next slide, please, Jo. So our final area that we looked at for our kind of deep dive for our themes for the review was around reducing inequalities in mental health by ethnicity. So the reason we decided to look at this element was we heard a lot throughout the pandemic around the disproportionate impact on people's mental health and well-being for specific ethnic groups. We heard stories from feedback we got from Healthwatch Leeds and from a specific piece of work that happened in Calderdale working with BAME communities. We got a lot of feedback really when they were asked questions around kind of how COVID had impacted on them. The health needs came out, but what came out more strongly was the impact on mental health, or what we would call the determinants of health, and the impact on people's well-being. So that was things related to job security, access to food, financial concerns, and concerns with kind of housing and health as well. So things like overcrowding. So our first mental health recommendation was really around the work we need to do to really consider the disproportionate impact on what we call those determinants of health. And there'll be a focus there looking at health and housing conditions, and also employment as well, and skills and opportunities for different ethnic groups. So that will be a real focus, and that's the first of the mental health recommendations, with the acknowledgement that all those things impact on people's mental well-being as a kind of a first step to good mental health. Then the second element was around, actually there's a lot going on already in relation to really good practice for improved mental health and reducing health inequalities and mental well-being. So all the great work of local authority public health teams, voluntary and community sector, there's loads of examples of good practice out there. So our second recommendation is we do a piece of work to coordinate that work, to share the good practice and learn from it, and to improve the use of the data and insight that we already hold, and to also to use that to coordinate some training. So if we're really starting to understand what barriers people have to accessing mental health and care services, how can we use that to coordinate training on that to frontline practitioners and the people designing and delivering services across West Yorkshire and Harrogate. So that made up our second recommendation, sorry. And the final recommendation again speaks back to the voluntary and community sector and the stories we heard around specifically during the pandemic, but actually it's an ongoing issue of if people aren't able to access mental health services or primary care services to talk about their mental health needs initially, often the first port of call is our local community sector organisations who are really embedded within local areas, and we'd like to do more to support those organisations in supporting people with their mental health needs, so helping them get into services, but also just that kind of support with mental well-being that might mean they don't need to access health and care services eventually, because we can support them in the first place in the community. But in order to do that, we recognise we need to be supporting the voluntary community sector both with their own personal resilience to handle hearing these stories and to support people themselves in the community, but also support them with some practical skills and specialist mental health input. So that's what made up our third recommendation for the mental health outcomes. Have the next slide, please, Jo. And this is a summary of the recommendations. I've gone through them all, but if you want to look at them in more detail, they're in the report and demonstrated in this infographic. So next slide, please, Jo. And the next one. Perfect. So the next steps, we've kind of summarised some high-level recommendations. So we've said what we're going to focus on, out of all the things that we, out of all the kind of evidence and insight we brought together. The next steps will be, well, how are we going to deliver that? Who's going to do it, and by when? So the next steps will be developing an action plan. It will be a measurable action plan with people or teams aligned to delivery of the recommendations, and that'll be available around December time. We're going to take it to our partnership board and present it there. So the next steps really is we really look forward to sharing that action plan with you, and showing you actually from these recommendations how are we going to deliver and what that's going to look like in practice. So that's everything from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatima, and thank you, Sarah. Can we now introduce Dr. Sahil Abbas, please? He's the chair of West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Equalities Network. Sahil is also a GP. Over to you, please, Sahil.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Sahil Abbas. I'm a GP in Bradford and the clinical director of Bradford CCG, and also the chair of the Health and Equalities Network. Can I have the slide, please? Yeah, this is the infographic that the Health and Equalities Network created. We call it West Yorkers. That's what you can see behind Sarah. And these 2.7 million people that we serve in our West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership, they are described in this slide as 100 people. Next slide, please. And out of these 100 people, 20 out of 100 are from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic communities. Which is 1 in 5, and that is what this review is about, and that tells us the importance of the work we are carrying out in our health and care partnership. Next slide, please. And as we have heard many times today, and we know that this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, has shown a light on health inequalities in West Yorkshire, and these are the 20% people who are concentrated in most deprived areas in West Yorkshire, who are overly represented in the high-risk population, in the high-risk occupations, and they are at extreme risk of morbidity and mortality with this pandemic. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Health Inequalities Network. Health Inequalities Network is one of 4 networks working with the Improving Population Health Program. The membership is multi-organizational. We have true representation of health and care sector with local authorities, with general practice, primary care networks, with the CCG, with acute trust, community trust, public health, voluntary and community sector organization, and universities. And the network, there's a lot that is going on in the health and equalities sector at the moment and within the network. But if we bundle it together, these are the 3 things that the Health and Equalities Network is doing and is aiming to do in future. The first thing is to support the system leadership and capability. The second aim is to increase the capacity across the system to tackle these really systemic health inequalities. And the third thing is to make sure that how we improve the use of intelligence, data, and insight to understand and address these inequalities in a better way. And we are working across the whole system. It's the whole population health approach. We're working at the system level, which is our ICS. We will be working at the place level. And as you know, in our ICS, we have 6 places. We'll be working at the neighborhood levels, the primary care networks, the partnerships, and right down to the individual, because at the end, it's the experience of that individual, which is who is receiving the health and care from us. Next slide, please. There are just a few examples of the work that the Health and Equalities Network and our partnership has been doing for quite some time, and that describes that there is so much work already going on, and this review is really bringing it all together. So these are just a few examples. So for example, we had the grant funding. Recently, the Health Inequalities grant fundings were awarded to the voluntary and community sector across our partnership. And 8 out of 14 successful applications were around interventions to improve health outcomes for the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. And you can see some of those voluntary care sector organizations on the screen. The Health Inequalities Prevention Pathway Framework, that is something that, again, the Health Inequalities Network has developed. And this is a resource to really support the people to understand sorry, can you see the slides?
I think there we go. We're back on now. Sorry about that.
Okay. So yeah. So we have done. You can see this the importance of this work in Sarah's slide when we're talking about for example, inequalities in mental health. So if the ambition is to reduce inequalities in mental health in a particular ethnic group, then obviously that is our population segment, and we will be looking across the whole prevention sector. We will be looking at the primary prevention. What are we going to do about the wider determinants that are making people prone to ill mental health? How can we diagnose and detect those people better? And then how can we treat them better? So this prevention pathway framework is going to work across the whole spectrum. And the thing is, one other project or program in Bradford that we is called Reducing Inequalities in City program. And that's an £8 million mega project, recurrently funded system-wide program to improve the health and reduce inequalities across the lifespan of people who are living in the most deprived area of central Bradford, what was former Bradford City CCG. And about 70-75% of those people living in the central Bradford are from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Next slide, please. So the Health Inequalities Network, how will you support the findings of the review? We are going to support the development of the action plan. We will bring together the intelligence and insight to continue to improve our understanding of inequalities, especially related to ethnicity. We are focusing the work of the network on population groups identified in the review, and we are working to develop and launch a West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health Inequalities Academy. And that is the first of its kind in the whole of England. And we are really looking forward. We're working with the partners in the partnership and with the university partners to launch this Health Inequalities Academy. And this academy, the ambition is that this will not only become the resource to go to, not just for our places and our region, but it will be a national example of good practice, that how the West Yorkshire is tackling health inequalities and sharing good practice. And we are going to work with the health inequalities executive leads to implement the interventions and monitor outcomes. And we have full commitment to continue to work with our voluntary and community sector to embed community-led approaches to reduce health inequalities, because at the end, it is the community resilience that is going to work. And I'm just going to end on this quotation, this quote from a 11th century Sufi saint of Persia, the Shams of Tabriz, the spiritual mentor of Rumi, that it's pointless trying to know where the way leads. Think only about your first step, and the rest will come. And that's what we are doing in West Yorkshire and Harrogate in our partnership. This BAME review is the first step. We have taken it with the right intention. We have taken it in the right direction. And we trust, we are confident that working together, the rest will just come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now could I introduce please Alison Lowe, CEO from Touchstone Leeds and Voluntary Community Sector. Hello Alison, over to you.
Hello, thank you. It's really brilliant to be here, and thank you for asking me to present today. If we go on to the first slide. So I just want to be really clear that the panel made a difference in the review that has taken place. So the BAME VSE panel made a difference, and I'm going to describe how we made a difference and some of the ways that that difference is permeated through the review report. So next slide, reality check. So first and foremost, we were really clear that the ICS review needed to acknowledge that racism exists and white privilege exists. And without those two things being acknowledged, it was not possible, A, for us to be involved, but also for this review to come to the conclusions that it has. Health inequalities are linked to the behaviours of people, which lead to people like my dad, who's from the Caribbean, people from Black South Asian communities across West Yorkshire and Harrogate, their health inequalities have been affected by racism, and we wanted that to be absolutely acknowledged. But also we wanted it to be acknowledged that white privilege in the system was one of the barriers to Black people's career progression, and also to an understanding as to why Black people's health inequalities were worst. So that was something that we wanted to be really clear about, because the current lens, as we got there, the lens was very white and was very Eurocentric. That's the difference we made from day one. And we also wanted to be clear that BAME, it's used throughout the report. It's important to recognise that the report also refers to the BAME over piece of work that Inc Arts have done, which is all about using the right language to describe people of Black, African, Caribbean and Southeast Asian heritage. And the report does refer to that piece of work, which we're really pleased about. But more importantly, we're all different. So all white people are different and all Black people, Southeast Asian people are different. But the thing that Black, Southeast Asian people experience that is the same is racism. Indirect, direct, microaggressions, you name it, we experience it. And it has an impact on our health, physically, mentally, and on our opportunities. As a result of those experiences, we were also sceptical. So we wanted the review panel to understand that we've been here before. Black people are being asked over and over again to take part in reviews, evaluations, fill this form in, give us your feedback, and nothing ever changes. So we were really sceptical about what would be different, and it took some time to build up a level of trust. But because the review panel was so, I think keen's the wrong word, but they were so open to hearing our reflections and so open to accepting their white privilege, that began to build that trust, and it built very quickly. And we also wanted an opportunity to celebrate the contributions of the Black Southeast Asian VCS across West Yorkshire and Harrogate, and that was another element of our contribution that we were keen to promote. It's great to see that today on the West Yorkshire and Harrogate website you will see our insight report, which is a work in progress. We haven't finished it yet. We've still got lots and lots of brilliant examples of fabulous contributions that we make to the health and well-being of our communities, but it's there today, so please do have a look. And we've also done a podcast that has members of the panel, and some of them are here today. Thank you so much for coming. And we're talking about both our lived experience of racism as individuals, but also the work that we're doing across West Yorkshire and Harrogate with communities, and how this work of the review will hopefully impact positively on the lives of those communities. So on to the next slide, looking at the areas of deep dive that were undertaken, we think we made a difference in the following areas. So I've lumped together recruitment and leadership because actually they are linked. And the challenge we brought to the review is that it was all about Black people being ready, being trained, and our challenge back was, well, we are here, we are ready, we are good enough, and you need to come and get us. So you need to find ways to in-reach into your own workforces because the talent is there, but also outreach into the communities that we're in, that our communities are in, faith sectors. We are there, we are ready, you need to come and get us. So that was a very clear challenge, and we were really pleased to see the fellowship programme fall out of that challenge that we brought. We're also really clear that the disciplinary and grievance figures in NHS trusts across the piece needed to be addressed, and we also challenged the team on collection of data, all of which have been included in the report. But more importantly, we demanded action. We don't just want people to see analysis, review, such as the equality impact assessment that has been going on for years and years and years. Nothing happens as a result of those. So our challenge was, yes, do the data, yes, do the analysis, but act. And that's where we put that challenge in. And in fact, what we're saying is we're going to be here throughout the whole of the action planning and the delivery of these recommendations, because we want to see that action and we want to be part of holding the system to account. On the population planning, I was delighted when I read the report, because I could see things that we had actually said replicated in that report, and that gave us power, that gave us validation, that made us feel that our time freely given had been worth that investment. So the 100% ethnicity recording came from us, and we celebrated in seeing that in the report. But we also really strongly said that the new system that comes out of this for commissioning needs to commission for health inequalities in the areas where the poorest people live, because that's where Black and Southeast Asian people live too. So we need to see a contract being developed between commissioners and the communities that they serve that understands the importance of the small BME, VCS organisations, the faith-based organisations that are already operating in those areas. We need the commissioning structures to understand the importance of the existing BME, VCS organisations, but also faith-based organisations, because we were really clear when we talked about the wider determinants under the health inequalities and mental health, that Islamophobia is a major issue in West Yorkshire in particular, maybe less so in Harrogate, but in West Yorkshire it's a major issue in health inequalities, and it needed to be addressed alongside racism. We also wanted to see some micro commissioning for very small VCSC organisations within the report, and again that is in there. So in the inequalities in mental health, we raised wider determinants many times, and we were really pleased that the role and the power of the voluntary community sector and the communities we serve, that power was acknowledged in that report, because we have the ability to work with the system to deliver the outcomes that are being proposed. So in lots and lots of different ways, we could see the difference that we made. We are committed to ensuring that this work is delivered. As I say, we want to stay. We want to work with the system to make sure that the action plan, which we're working on too, is delivered. And we want to work with you, hold you accountable, because we've invested our time, our passion, our energy, and we've done that for the communities we serve. So we're not going anywhere. We've made them promises, and we're going to hold you to account. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Alison. Brilliant and passionate as ever. Thank you. Could I introduce you now, please, to Robin Tuddenham, CEO for Calderdale Council, newly appointed Chief Officer for Calderdale Clinical Commissioning Group, and the co-chair of a lot of the work that's taking place here today and much wider. Over to you, please, Robin.
Thanks, Karen, and I'm probably competing with Rob now for the longest job title in Europe, but it's a bit of a battle. And it's the second time this week I've followed Alison, and it's not an easy task because Alison so eloquently captures the issues that have come up in this review, that have been reinforced by this review, and the urgency and call for action that we have to take forward. Sarah's captured some of the practical steps we will undertake next in terms of turning this into action. I would just say that I think it's really critically important that we learn from how we conducted the review, so ably chaired by Professor Dame Donna Kinnear, the way that unheard voices and voices of lived experience were heard, alongside voices of those in senior roles and in roles of status and influence, and how we co-designed and co-produced the review. And that has to be part of how we take forward the action plan and what we do next. It's not just going to be a kind of action plan that we do to meet a requirement. It will be something we co-design together and we actually deliver together. And I just really want to kind of pick up a couple of other points, and then I know we want to have some time for questions. Clearly, this has come COVID at a time when there's been the international impact and the very local impact of the murder of George Floyd, and the impact I think that Rob touched on, which is the pain, the anger, and the sense of exhaustion felt by our communities and our staff. And when I wrote to staff about that, I had more responses than any other communication I've ever made, and it was around over 200. And that was a very powerful experience of the voices that we need to hear, that we need to embrace, and the role of the voluntary community sector in representing our communities, and the role of our workforce in representing our organisations. And I just Layla Sardin has written about white supremacy and white privilege and said that you cannot dismantle what you cannot see or hear, and you cannot challenge what you can't understand. And so we do need to understand, we do need to see, we do need to hear, and sometimes those the victories that we can make on that journey need to be reflected. And buried in quite an interesting piece of media coverage today about somehow racism isn't a factor in COVID. What you may see if you looked at that report is that one representative, one scientist spoke to the National Review yesterday, and gave that view. I think it's actually a more nuanced view, actually, what he said. But let's not forget the position and the risk of mainstream media, mainstream voices in power, seeking to sideline, minimize, and reduce the kind of voices and the kind of experience and the kind of findings that our reviewers come up with. And this battle is not one, and this journey is not one that's over. And we cannot underestimate the way that these challenges and the learning that we've had will not be something that's necessarily easy to convey, and both into the centre and into our organisations. So we've got a way to go. But in all of that, I think just recognising that one of the elements around recording of ethnicity and death certificates, which thanks to the support of Owen Williams, CHFT, Rob Webster, and people at national level like Victor Adebowale, who have pushed for that. And we just got on and did it in Calderdale, and we've been recording that data, ethnicity and faith, since May. And it's pretty outrageous that actually we weren't doing it before, and that we're having to say that data recording is something that needs to happen. That even to need to say that the data that we have isn't the quality that it needs to be, because it doesn't allow us to understand, it doesn't allow us to think, plan, and strategically respond to the lived experience of our organisations, our staff, and our people and our communities. And we really shouldn't have to have that in 2020 as a recommendation. But the reality is that we need it in there, and we need to use that data, and that data has supported us for all of us planning for winter and planning in the second wave and beyond that. So just a sense that this is a long-term process. We did start it earlier, before the review, before COVID. We have been recognising this as an issue for some time in the ICS and in our organisations, but this is really galvanising us. It's been inspirational, and a thank you to everyone. And I have taken so much from it personally, and we will go forward with this, and we will make a difference. So thank you to everyone that's played such a part in this, and thank you all for your hard work. I won't name you all, but there's been a team behind this that have been absolutely inspirational. So thank you. And I think we'll have now time for some questions, and from the chair, led by the chair. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Robin. There's so much activity in the chat box. I've tried to keep on top of it all, and I'll make sure that all our guest speakers see all the wonderful recognition for all the hard work and the passion that they put into their presentation. So thank you for that. There was a couple of questions early on. Would you like me to start there, Dame Donna? Yeah, shall I whiz right back up to the top? I'll try and whiz right back up to the top. Sorry, just forgive me why I hang on to these. So lots of comments around recognising multifaceted approach to dismantling health inequalities. Just going right up to the top. Lots about great commitment. Yes. So this one here that recognises from Don Pearson to Sarah about listening skills, so we can capture voices and being prepared to listen to the hard stuff and the cracks in the system and how we bring that forward. And then the commissioning of data as well. Sorry, I'm just looking. Gosh, there must be about 400 comments in here. My apologies for going right up here. So I think we're getting there. So, right, here we go. So this one was for you, Dame Donna, and it was, what does it say about existing approaches when the pandemic has shone a light on the inequalities that have been prevalent for such a long time?
That's an interesting question, because we've always known that racism or structural inequalities have existed, and we've always done things to try and alleviate. As a health service, we've done many things to try and alleviate. I remember, 25 years ago, trying to put services in to stop babies dying. So it isn't that we've completely ignored them, but I think what the pandemic has done is shone a light in the way that has made us question if all our frontline doctors, nurses, care workers are suffering to this extent. We need to do something greater. We need to do something on a collective basis. Also, just even the pandemic has shone a light on the fact that how do we enter those communities without people looking like those communities and understanding those communities, getting inside and helping them and us to really create services that make a difference for them. So it isn't that we've sat there for many, many years. I myself, as a young nurse, did a huge amount on sickle cell, individual items. But this is about a collective. This is about how you get to the root and branch of some of these issues that we face. And I love this review because it just doesn't deal with the issues on the ground, but it deals with the structural issues that can make it better for those on the ground. It makes sure that the voluntary sector, who those on the ground speak to, are a component part of it. So it's not to say that we haven't spent our entire lives, myself as a commissioner, but all of these good people in West Yorkshire and Harrogate, trying to make things better for individuals. But this is a collective approach, and it's massive. And we're not going to do it in one day. But what we've shown is a commitment to go further and deeper and truly understand it, but make sure that we've got the structures in place to do something about it.
Can I just add something, Karen?
Yes, of course, please do.
So I think it's a brilliant question, and I think Donna's picked up the fact that this is a system response, and we've, for the last 4.5 years, been really clear that there are equal partners in this system, which are the communities we serve, the third sector, the NHS and local government, and other providers together. And only when we see ourselves as equal partners can we achieve the right outcomes. And only when we're working in and with our communities can we achieve the outcomes that we want. And it's just a plea to all my NHS colleagues, really. So when we get into the next inevitable conversations about what our ICS is and what should we do with CCGs and all that stuff, we should always ask ourselves the question, whatever we do, how is it going to make sure we continue to have an equal partnership? And how is it going to make sure that we continue to address these sorts of issues together?
Brilliant, thank you. I'll just whiz through the chat box if that's okay, Dara, just in case there's any more questions coming in. Angwin's asked a question around accessible formats. We've got lots of accessible formats, including audio, British Sign Language, community languages. We've got a submarine and easy read, and we've also got films by people with learning disabilities and lots of films from our VCS colleagues. If there's anything missing, do shout out, because we're absolutely committed to being 100% accessible on all that we do, not just this, but on all we do. So thank you for raising that point. Just scrolling right down to the very end to see. Oh gosh, there's tons. Just going to the bottom. Oh, right, here's one. And perhaps this is one around the funding element, Donna. We look to invest in our communities following this review and ensure that we can get the funding. Can we do that? And I think that pulls on the point of Alison's.
Well, I'm going to hand that swiftly over to Councillor Tim Swift or to Rob Wester, because actually, even leading this review won't mean that I can access all the funds in this area. So, but I'm sure the commitment is there.
Thanks, Al. Rob, do you want to go first on that?
You're on mute, Rob.
I'm not now. I'm just pressing the button out, so I win the bingo on who was on mute first. So I think it's right that we ask the question about resources, and I think what we can point to as a partnership is that we have backed real work with resources. So during the pandemic, We knew from the work we'd done with the third sector that resilience in the third sector was challenged, is the polite way of putting it. And we put over £500,000 directly into third sector organisations with a focus on inequality. And we increased that amount as far as we could when we saw that there were a huge number of people wanting to invest. What we also can do as a partnership is connect to other bits of government and the system. And we know that the National Lottery is being given a significant sum to invest in the third sector to help with real issues. But the way that happens is quite clunky. So we went straight to the regional lottery and said, we've got a range of things here we could do if you've got the money. And some of those are now being funded. So I think direct investment and connection to other bits of the system is essential. But I think it comes back to the role of the partnership board in overseeing our 5-year plan and our economic recovery plan. And I know that Kirsten was on the call earlier, but in the economic recovery plan for West Yorkshire and Harrogate, we're talking about health and jobs and how they're part of our economic recovery. We're talking about, the supply chain into health, which brings jobs. We're talking about research, which brings knowledge and jobs and skills. And we're talking about medtech as a big driver of the economy. And this review talks about making sure that those jobs, those opportunities are accessible to everybody, and that people don't think, well, that sort of thing isn't for me because of the community I live in or because of my background. So there's a direct relationship there. And then in the 5-year plan around how we're implementing our resources in health and care, the fact that we now have to report on, measure and deliver against our constitutional standards like waiting times with a view to inequality is helpful. But the recommendations in this report that says commissioning and planning needs to have an eye on it too can only help us direct the resources in the right place. Sorry, that's a very long answer, but I think it shows that this is a multifactorial response that's required. We have the levers, we have the leadership, we need to now put it in place.
Thank you for that, Rob and Donna and Councillor Swift. Somebody else in the chat box asked.
I don't know if Tim wanted to say something else on that, actually. I've seen it, I can see him, you might not be able to use his hand. So.
I think you've covered that pretty comprehensively, Rob. I think our ability to lead, when on the one hand resources in some areas like local government are under pressure, that ability to lever in additional resources and try to change the way other institutions operate as well is a part of it. I think being clear, we have to see all this work as mainstream and not as extras that we fund marginally. It's about changing the way we do our core business, not just about finding little extras to fund at the margins, and particularly making sure we build this into the review, looking at what we can do in terms of enhancing skills and so on.
Thank you,
can I just add to this? Sorry, Karen.
No, please do.
Yeah, so it's from the Health Inequalities Network. There are examples where we are working with the VCS sector in terms of grant funding and everything. But one of the real thing that we are really keen to do in the Inequalities Network is, because VCS is not one sector, there are mega organizations and there are very small frontline organizations, and the process of funding could create real inequalities within the VCS sector. So one thing that we are really keen to do, and we are doing with our VCS colleagues in the Inequalities Network, to raise the skills and to support those really grassroots community organizations so they can have access to funding as well as the big organizations. So that is something that in terms of funding the Health Inequalities Network is doing, and will continue to help all the organizations in the VCS sector.
Karen, I don't know if you're looking for questions. I know that Sheila Grant had asked if she could come in and ask a question.
Oh, please. Yes, do. There's tons of questions. But yes, please, Rob, you go ahead.
Sheila Grant, I think, had asked a question, and is sceptical. So it's really helpful to hear some questioning voices, I think. So Sheila, I don't know if you want to come in.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I've come in really after almost 15 years away from mental health. I'm conscious of time, so I'll try to be succinct in what I'm saying. I've been away for about 15 years. I've come back into mental health formally after working within the heart of Chapeltown with small communities, small groups of people on a one-to-one basis. And I think I'm sort of trying my best not to become emotional about it, but I am, because it means so much. That even though the language that I've heard this morning has become a lot more sophisticated, a lot more insightful, I still don't hear how you're going to reach me in the heart of Chapeltown. I'm still not hearing how the clients that are knocking on our door on Chapeltown Road are going to be helped. I still don't hear how Black workers that will be supported into leadership positions and moving up the scale, which is absolutely admirable, are going to be supported to work with their own biases around race so that they then don't transfer that onto the people they're working with. I still don't feel confident after so many years of being away and deciding now was another chance for me to see if I can get back involved and see if I can help, because what I'm seeing in Chapeltown is absolutely heartbreaking. So I just wanted you all as a group to hear, I absolutely admire all the work that's been doing, and I know how difficult it is. But I don't feel as if, as an African Caribbean woman, the mother of Afro-Caribbean young adults, the auntie to African young men who are being diagnosed mentally unwell, I'm not confident that we're going to get the help we need. I'm sorry if I sound emotional, but I apologize for that.
I just wondered if I could come in here, partly because you're absolutely right. I'm not going to try and diminish anything you've said, because many of the people that we're making this launch to today will have similar views to you. But one of the things that I take comfort in is that this review has been really challenging. And, you know, Rome isn't going to be built in a day. We're not going to be able to boil the ocean in one go. But one of the reasons, as I said in my opening speech, why I'm incredibly proud to chair this review is because we are starting to ask that question. There is nothing that can impact on us, I don't think, in our lifetime as COVID-19 has. When we saw the magnitude of death and suffering as both individuals in our families, but also in our communities, whatever community you belong to, we know that we've got to do something about this. So I think the very fact that this review has recognised that, and yes, it's been a long history. I've been part of that long history myself as community, asking those questions. But what we can do, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it? So we have made a commitment, and I think the voluntary and community sector have said, look, mate, we're going to hold you to account to deliver what you've said. And I guess that's where I'd want to say it. We've asked the tough questions. We're seeking those answers. We haven't got them all, but it's a start of a journey.
May I add to that? So, as an Asian woman myself, Sheila, you are voicing feelings that I've felt, that I've heard from my colleagues, and you know, the cynicism and the wariness to be hopeful, it comes from a place of not wanting to be let down again, and I hear that and I feel that. What I will say is you can't correct decades or centuries of inequality in a few months, and we're not aspiring to do that. What we are aspiring to do with this report is to acknowledge that something is wrong, to acknowledge that change needs to happen, but also a commitment on a very public platform that we're going to do something about it. And this is the first step in that. And it's going to take time, and we need help from people like you to get it right, because I don't have all the answers. Donna doesn't have all the answers. What we can do, and what I can assure you, is that there is a real appetite to share the power, which I've never seen before. There's a real appetite to share the resources, which I've never seen before. And there's a real appetite to give platforms to people that have not had it before. So all I can say to you from my own personal experience is this feels different. I feel hopeful, and I've committed to this. I've put my heart and soul to it, as have many members on this review. And we need people like you to keep holding up a mirror to remind us of why we're doing it. But we won't get it right in 2 or 3 weeks or even a year. It's going to take time.
I think Robin wants to come in as well.
Yeah, I just what Sheila said is really powerful. I think that, I mean, I'm in my 31st year in public services, and we've all been in many reviews, haven't we? And many pieces of work, and been through, whether it's riots, disturbances, all of us, regardless of who we are, what our backgrounds are, our position in organisations. This review has been different. This review has been different because the kind of thing that Sheila's just described has been in the room. It's been in the room in the review. It's been in the room in the meetings, and others have expressed their personal experience, but others who actually professionally work on these issues have shared their experience, and the lived experience of someone seeking urgent care that we heard in the last meeting from a colleague in an organisation, the lived experience of a colleague who works in the sector but also had family directly affected, and that's had a real impact personally on me, and I think all of us. And I think, I'm not saying that's enough, of course it isn't, but I do think there's a rich picture that this review's got. It's now our responsibility, my responsibility, to make this mean something in West Yorkshire.
Yeah, so just, Sheila, that was brilliant. And I think everybody, if you look in the chat function, there's loads of support for you and for what you've just said. And it's great that, so thank you for doing that. And I think we should introduce something called the Sheila test. You know, in all that we're doing. So what does this pass the Sheila test in terms of, is it seen and felt in Chapeltown? And it seems to me there are some practical recommendations that should help pass the Sheila test. So in the mental health recommendations, there's one about, third sector organisations and support and applying different approaches to engaging with people on their mental illness, which are culturally competent. And all of that sort of finessed language, as you say, is really just about building confidence in communities and making sure people can access care. So I think let's introduce a Sheila test would be my plea out of that. But I can see that Sheila Condon's got a hand up. Shirley Condon, sorry.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so I wanted to just, it follows the theme really. I mean, this is an amazing piece of work. I'm so impressed. But I think it was Robin who said, think about the first step. And I think Martin Luther King also said, faith is really, really important. And when you think about faith, it's about taking the first step on a staircase when you can't see where it's going to. And I think the conversations that we're having is about how we as system leaders across not just health and social care, but beyond that, can act in a way where we are constantly every day working on that piece of work about trust and faith. And I think we as system leaders should be doing something ourselves to work more effectively and with great determination to make sure this is what our long-term plans in all of our organisations. Because Argo University, that's full of young people from BAME backgrounds, many of them, probably a third of them, entering health and social care professions. So I want to be part of the journey with everybody, and I want to commit here today, but I think it's about how do we instill that trust and faith.
I think there's a lot of nods there, Shirley, for that contribution, and we had a lot of conversation about allyship in the review as well, which is incredibly important for us. As the other thing I think I like about the review recommendations is there's quite a bit of personal commitment required from all of us, and there's also a bit of with the anti-racism campaigning, there's a bit of campaigning to do as well, really, which is good. Karen, had you picked up any further questions from? I think I saw one earlier on about safe work. What does safe work mean?
Let's have a little look. Just read that through again. Lots of recognition for all the comments today. I understand they want action now. That was a really good comment from Sasha. So I'm just whizzing through some more.
So I think to paraphrase.
Here's one. Yeah, sorry. So we've got one. How will organisations make up the system demonstrate? How will they hold them up to demonstrate accountability and commitment to implementing the recommendations of the report, please? So somebody's asked that question. That's Hina. And then, so Helen Hunter came with one. Helen, do you want to ask your question? We still got Helen on the phone. No, she.
Apologies, sorry, I'm scrolling back to try and find exactly what I said. I think actually part of it refers to kind of what Rob's described with the sort of Sheila test. I'm mindful that there's been incredible involvement in terms of developing this, but we need to retain that involvement in the scrutiny of this as we move forward, so that actually we're consistently being called to account in terms of whether or not we're actually making the progress that we've promised. And I just wanted to get some assurance on how that might happen going forward.
Does Councillor Swift want to respond to that as part of the Partnership Board, Rob? Is Councillor Swift still with us about the accountability of the Partnership Board?
Yes, I must admit I was trying to read other questions in the chat at the same time. I mean, I think that. So I suppose there's a couple of things I take from that. I mean, this has been incredibly powerful, hearing the different voices, and I think we do need to think about how we retain that as part of what we do. It's very easy to get squeezed out of kind of formal meetings and get back into a habit of simply discussing papers and recommendations, and finding different ways that we keep hearing that different range of voices in different ways is really important. I think that probably also overlaps with the question, doesn't it, about ownership of this? I mean, the Partnership Board is not separate to the organisations. The partnership is all of us together. So in one sense, we've committed to this by, by the work in commissioning this and by receiving the review and no doubt committing to the action plan. But I think also many of us will want to think a bit more about taking this back and getting sort of making sure there's quite specific ownership of this in our organisations as well, because I think there's there's a lot of learning for individual organisations in here, and it's important that we think about different ways that it's embedded, both within management but also within kind of those of us in governance roles as well. I don't know if that covers some of it.
I think it does, Tim, to some extent, and I can see. I'm conscious, Karen, that we're due to finish in about 3 minutes.
Yes.
And Fatima, you've got your hand up. Do you want to say something before we finish?
Yes, it was just to add to Councillor Swift's point about accountability and next steps. So obviously Sarah's alluded to the process by which we're going to develop the action plan, but the accountability will be in a range of forums. So to answer Helen's question, there will be a specific role for our third sector panel that will continue to work. There will be a role for our BAME network across the region in regards to providing constructive challenge, but also holding to account, as well as the partnership organisation. So there is something about that. This is a collective plan owned by everyone, and very much in the ethos and values of how we work as a partnership, which is that mutual accountability, peer challenge, but in a supportive way, because we want to get it right, and we're all about, doing it for the right reasons.
Donna, is there anything you want to say before I round up?
I think it's really important that actually we recognise that there is a lot to do. We've come together, we've started a journey, and I recognise that there is a long history in West Yorkshire and Harrogate. But what I can say is that the panel that have convinced me, I don't lend my name to any old review. And I appreciated chairing this because I got an absolute commitment that the individuals, the leaders, wanted to do something different. And I have to confess that was the very first question that I asked. Are you really committed to this? Because, I've done a lot of whitewashes and been part of a lot of whitewashes. That's not politically correct, I know, but in the past. But absolutely, the guarantee for me to join this review was that everybody wanted to deliver on this. And I think we've been very explicit in the review about the things that we want to tackle, and they're not easy things and they will take time. So I just wanted to leave you with that because, I don't join any old review. I absolutely joined this because I believed that the leaders of West Yorkshire and Harrogate and others wanted to do something different.
Thanks, Udi, you want to go? I'll let Udi Archibald come in very, very briefly before I say a few final thoughts. Go on, Udi. Okay, you've got your hand up, Udi, but you're not coming in. So unless you're on mute, you don't want to come in, press the wrong button. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I had speaking. I didn't realize I had not unmuted my microphone. I just want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to say something, and thank you everybody for this work. One of the things that I am hearing, and I think is something that is reassuring, is it appears you're taking the state of emergency approach to this. What that means is we stop everything because it's been horrible and we're going to get it right. But I think for me, the test is always to make sure that we have some quick wins and that people will have that reassurance to see something in the next few weeks, next few months, and so on. Because we are talking about a situation people have been waiting for years and years, generations. So what I would really, really like is that we start seeing things shortly that will reassure us and keep that faith and give us hope that more is coming. So it's a plea to the partners. It's a plea to those that will be delivering and implementing things. If we want to keep the faith and get people in these communities to trust us, we need to start seeing actions as soon as.
Perfect. Yeah, it's Robin, Rob. I was just going to say I think that's really excellent. Thank you, Udi. I'm a real big fan of just seeing quick wins because it just shows intent. So I think we'll take that away, and we'll deliver on that.
So I was asked, I think, just to make some closing remarks, and I think I've been looking forward to this for some time, and I think it's been a really great hour and a half. It reflects, I think, a huge amount of work. So I must thank everybody who's been involved in this, everyone who's been involved in the panels, everyone in the community who came to speak to us, every third sector organisation who's been involved, the core team who have worked tirelessly on this, and Professor Dame Donna for chairing. I think I've been involved in health and care at all levels in the system. Right at the heart of government and right at the front line. And this is one of the finest pieces of work I've been involved in. The quality of the thinking, the quality of the evidence, the quality of the engagement is outstanding. I think what we're left with is a promise, really. I think what Alison's told us is you've raised our expectations now, and we're going to hold you to account because you've given us hope. So please don't make that false hope. And I think that's where we're left, really. We've got a plan here that we can execute because we can choose to as a group of leaders, and we can make a significant difference, and we can start making that difference very quickly so that people get hope that we can deal with generational systemic issues over time. And I'm really pleased. I'm very proud of the partnership for this work, and I want to be even more proud in the next 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, that we've made the visible change that we want to see, and that we all passed the Sheila test. So thanks everybody for the work that you've done. Thanks for being involved. All of the resources are available on the website. I think a recording of this is available as well, Karen, somewhere, is it?
Yes.
I think all of the resources are available in accessible formats, whether that's BSL, Easy Read, or other languages. And let's not make this the only time we talk about this review. So thanks, everybody.
Bye.